The night I decided to lie for my son, the air smelled like rusted metal and wet asphalt, and I remember thinking how strange it was that the world kept breathing even as my own lungs forgot how. I was 62 then, still strong enough to lift groceries with one arm, still foolish enough to believe a mother's love could bend truth without breaking it. The police lights painted my living room in bruised colors, red, blue, red, like a heartbeat gone wrong. My son sat on the couch with his hands folded so neatly in his lap it frightened me. He looked like a boy again, not the man who had borrowed money he never repaid, not the man who avoided mirrors, not the man whose eyes darted to the door whenever someone knocked. They asked who had been driving. My mouth answered before my mind did. I was. Even now, writing this with hands spotted by age, I can feel the weight of that single word dropping into my chest like a stone. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself the truth could be put on a shelf, like the good china we only used at Christmas. I told myself he was scared, that fear makes people freeze, that mothers exist to move when children cannot. I told myself 1,000 gentle lies to make room for the one brutal lie that mattered. The truth was uglier. Someone had died. A man crossing the street after a late shift, lunch pail swinging from his wrist, thinking about his bed, his wife, his life. My son's car hit him hard enough to throw his body into the air, hard enough to shatter a spine, hard enough to echo down the street like a gunshot, hard enough that the sound still lives in me, though I wasn't there. I learned the details later. At first, all I saw was my son's face, pale and hollow, like a house after a fire. When the officer asked again, more slowly this time, I didn't look at my son. I looked at the framed photo of him on the wall, 8 years old, missing 2 teeth, holding a fishing rod too big for his hands. I remembered the way he cried the first day of school, clinging to my skirt, begging me not to leave him with strangers. I didn't leave him that night either. They took me in handcuffs that felt colder than winter. My son didn't follow. He stood in the doorway, shoulders shaking, hands covering his face, and for a moment, just a moment, I waited for him to shout the truth. I waited for him to say, "No, it was me." I waited like you wait for thunder after lightning, certain it must come. It didn't. The cell smelled of disinfectant and despair. I sat on a metal bench and thought of all the ways life narrows without warning. One moment you're stirring soup, the next you're staring at a concrete wall with someone else's blood on your conscience. I rehearsed my story again and again, sanding down the edges, smoothing the cracks. I had been tired. I hadn't seen him. The road was dark. An accident. Just an accident. At trial, my son sat behind me, not beside me. That hurt more than the sentence. He never looked me in the eye. When I spoke, my voice trembled the way it did when I was young and afraid, but I kept going. Mothers are good at continuing through pain. We do it every day. The judge said my age would be considered. He said mercy was not the same as forgiveness. He said words like responsibility and consequence and closure. I heard none of it. All I heard was the echo of my son's silence. Prison ages you faster than time ever could. My hair went gray in patches, like frostbitten fields. My knees ached, my back bent. I learned the schedule of sorrow, the clang of doors, the shuffle of feet, the nights when crying moved through the halls like a wandering animal. I learned which women carried guilt like a disease and which wore it like armor. I told no one the truth. Confessions are dangerous things when you are already buried. My son visited once, then twice, then not at all. At first, he cried. He promised he would fix everything. He promised he would tell them. He promised this would not be my ending. Promises are easy to make when the cost belongs to someone else. Letters came less often. Phone calls grew shorter. He got married. He had children. I learned these things through second-hand words, through the thin paper of life moving on without me. He never asked how I slept. He never asked if my hands shook when I held a spoon. He never asked if I hated him. I didn't. That's the terrible part. I loved him with the same quiet ferocity as always. Love does not evaporate when betrayed. It calcifies. It turns into something heavy and sharp you carry everywhere. When I was released, I was an old woman pretending to be free. The world had changed in small, humiliating ways. Phones were thinner, streets louder. People rushed past me like I was already a ghost. My son picked me up and hugged me stiffly, like a stranger at a funeral. His eyes slid away from mine. "Thank you," he said. 2 words, no apology, no confession, just gratitude, as if I'd loaned him a coat instead of my remaining years. I went back to my small house. Dust coated everything like a thin regret. I sat in my old chair and listened to the ticking clock, wondering when my life had quietly ended. I waited for remorse. I waited for truth to knock on my door the way the police once had. It never did. Years passed. My hands weakened. My hearing faded. But my memory sharpened, cruel and precise. I replayed that night until it felt like I had lived it myself. Sometimes I wondered if this was my punishment. Not the cell, not the sentence, but the knowing. The knowing that the lie I told had grown roots, that it had wrapped itself around my son's life and mine, choking us both in different ways. I told myself I would take the truth to my grave. I told myself it was too late. I told myself confession would only hurt the innocent. Then, one afternoon, while sorting through old papers, I found something that made my breath stop. And that was the moment I realized the lie had never been as simple as I believed. The paper trembled in my hands like it was alive. It was a police report, one I had never been shown, one my lawyer never mentioned. I don't know how it ended up tucked between old medical bills and grocery lists, but there it was, yellowed at the edges, smelling faintly of dust and ink. I sat down hard, the chair creaking under my weight, and began to read. There were details I didn't recognize, times that didn't match what I'd sworn under oath, witness statements I had never heard, and then, one line, neat and merciless, that split my chest open. Driver appeared to hesitate before impact. Brake marks suggest delayed reaction. Delayed reaction. That wasn't me. I knew my own body. Even tired, even old, my reflexes were sharp. Years of driving that same road had carved it into muscle memory. I would have braked. I would have swerved. I would have done something. But my son had always been slow to react when overwhelmed. As a boy, he froze when things went wrong, spilled milk, broken glass, raised voices. He would just stand there, eyes wide, waiting for someone else to step in. I pressed the paper to my chest and felt my heart hammering, loud as a fist on a door. They knew. Or at least, they suspected. The room felt smaller, like the walls were leaning in to listen. I thought of the judge's face, serious but not unkind. Of the way the prosecutor had tilted her head when I described the accident. Of the questions that circled me like birds, but never landed. They had let me take the fall. A bitter laugh crawled out of my throat, thin and cracked. All those years I believed I had fooled them, that my sacrifice had been clean, simple. But this was something else entirely. This was a quiet agreement, a collective turning away. I wondered if that was worse. That night, sleep wouldn't come. My mind wandered through the years like a trespasser, opening doors I'd kept locked. I remembered my son's childhood with sharper edges now, the way he lied easily about small things, the way he let others clean up his messes, the way he learned early that silence could be a shield. Had I taught him that? Each time I smoothed things over, made excuses, took blame, was I rehearsing him for that night? Guilt is strange. It doesn't fade with time. It changes shape. It waits. The next morning, I called my son. He answered on the third ring, breathless, distracted. "Mom?" he said, like he was surprised to hear my voice. I found something, I told him. Silence stretched between us. I could hear traffic in the background, the hum of a life in motion. What kind of something? He asked carefully. A report, I said. One that suggests they knew it wasn't me. Another pause. Longer this time. I imagined his face tightening, the way it used to when he was cornered. Mom, he sighed. Why are you digging this up now? That question, why now, cut deeper than any accusation, as if truth had an expiration date, as if lies, once aged, became harmless. I want to understand, I said. All these years, I thought I was protecting you from the law, but it seems I was also protecting others from inconvenience. You said you'd handle it, he snapped, then caught himself. You said you didn't want this to ruin my life. And you let me, I whispered. He didn't deny it. I had kids, he said instead. A job, things to lose. I closed my eyes. So did I. The words hung there, fragile and sharp. For a moment, I thought he might finally say it, might confess, might apologize, might sound like my son again, but he didn't. Look, he said, voice lowering. What's done is done. Stirring this up won't help anyone. You served your time. We all moved on. We all. Not me. I had not moved on. I had been left behind, aging in a truth no one wanted spoken. After we hung up, I cried, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, the way old women cry when they've run out of places to put their grief. My reflection in the darkened window startled me. I looked ancient, smaller, like a life folded in on itself. For days after, I felt something shifting inside me. A restlessness. A question I could no longer silence. I had believed my silence was noble, but now I wondered, had it been cowardice dressed up as love? I began to write, at first just notes, dates, memories, then longer passages. My hand cramped, my wrist ached, but I kept going. I wrote about the night of the accident, about prison, about the years that followed. I wrote about my son, not cruelly, but honestly. I wrote the truth I had swallowed whole. Each word felt like both a betrayal and a release. I told myself it was just for me, that no one would ever read it. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Stories don't ask permission once they're born. One afternoon, while rereading what I'd written, a realization struck me so hard I had to grip the table to steady myself. The man who died? No one had ever truly gotten justice for him. His family had accepted my guilt because it was offered neatly, convincingly. Closure, they called it. But closure built on a lie is just another kind of wound. For the first time, my thoughts shifted away from my son. What did I owe that man? The answer frightened me, because I knew then, truly knew, that my silence had not been an act of love. It had been an act of fear. Fear of losing my son, fear of being alone, fear of a truth too loud to live with. And fear, I was beginning to understand, had already taken everything it could from me. What it hadn't taken yet was my voice. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning, not my neighbors, not the women at the senior center who played cards with hands like dried leaves, not even my doctor who spoke to me gently as if I were already fading. Plans, I had learned, become weaker when spoken aloud. They invite interruption, and I had been interrupted enough for one lifetime. Every morning, I sat at the small kitchen table and wrote. The light came in slanted through the window, dust motes drifting like tiny witnesses. I wrote slowly, because my hands were slow now, but my mind was sharp in a way it had never been when I was young. Age peels away the illusions. It leaves you with bones and truth. I wrote about the man who died, even though I never knew his name at first. I wrote him into existence as best I could, his tired feet, The way he must have felt relief stepping off the curb, thinking he was almost home. I imagined his wife waiting, the dinner gone cold. I imagined the knock on her door and how the world must have tilted sideways for her. I cried for her in a way I never had before, because grief recognizes its own. When I finally looked up his name, it felt like trespassing on sacred ground. I said it out loud, testing its weight. It fit in my mouth too easily. That felt wrong. A whole life reduced to a sound. I began to notice how people treated me when they learned I'd been to prison. There was a careful kindness in their eyes, a softened voice. Some looked at me with pity, some with curiosity, some with a quiet admiration that made my stomach turn. "You paid your debt," one woman said, squeezing my hand. "You're brave." I almost laughed. Bravery would have been telling the truth when it mattered. One afternoon, my son showed up unannounced. I hadn't seen him in months. He looked older than I remembered, lines cutting into his face, his hair thinning at the crown. For a moment, my heart leapt the way it always did when I saw him. That reflex hadn't died. I hated myself for it. He noticed the papers spread across the table, the notebooks, the careful stacks. "What's all this?" he asked. "My story," I said simply. He frowned. "Why?" "Because it's mine," I replied. "And because it's time." He sat down heavily, rubbing his hands together like he was cold. "Mom, don't do this," he said. "You're going to open wounds that don't need opening." I met his eyes then, really met them, and I saw something I hadn't wanted to see before. Not guilt, not sorrow, but fear. Not fear for me, fear for himself. "You've been asking me not to do this my whole life," I said softly, "ever since you were a boy hiding behind my skirt." "That's not fair," he snapped. "No," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "What's not fair is that a man died and his children grew up without him. What's not fair is that I grew old carrying a lie so you wouldn't have to." His jaw tightened. "I said I was sorry." "You said thank you," I corrected him. "Once." He stood abruptly, pacing the small room like a trapped animal. "What do you want from me now?" he demanded. "To confess? To ruin my family? To destroy everything I built?" I watched him move through the house, touching nothing, as if afraid contamination worked both ways. "I want you to tell the truth," I said. "At least to yourself." "That won't change anything," he said. "The statute of limitations." "This isn't about the law," I interrupted. "It's about the truth breathing somewhere outside my chest before I die." He stopped pacing. For a moment he looked very tired. "You always were dramatic," he muttered. That hurt more than I expected, because it told me exactly how small my suffering had become to him. When he left, he didn't hug me. He stood in the doorway like a guest overstaying his welcome, then turned and walked away. I didn't chase him. Mothers chase for decades. I was done running. Weeks passed. My health faltered. There were days I couldn't write. Days when my hands betrayed me. Days when the past pressed so heavily on my chest, I wondered if I'd waited too long. But then I would remember the man's name. I would remember his family. And I would sit back down. I contacted a journalist. It took 3 tries before I pressed send. I expected disbelief, skepticism, maybe even ridicule. What I didn't expect was the quiet seriousness of her reply. "I believe you," she wrote, "and I want to listen." The first time we spoke, my voice shook. But as the hours passed, something settled in me. I told her everything. The accident, the lie, the years, my son. She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush me. She let the story unfold the way it needed to. When we hung up, I felt lighter and terrified. The story, once released, no longer belonged to me. The backlash came quickly. Old headlines resurfaced. People debated my motives. Some called me a saint. Some called me a monster. My son called me screaming. "You promised," he yelled into the phone. "You promised you wouldn't ruin me." "I promised to protect you," I said quietly. "I never promised to disappear." He hung up on me. That was the last time we spoke. The article was published on a rainy morning. I read it slowly, my name printed there like a confession carved in stone. For the first time in decades, the truth existed outside my body. I expected regret to crash into me. Instead, there was only a deep, aching calm. Then the letter arrived. It was from the man's wife. I held it unopened for a long time, my fingers trembling, my heart racing like I was about to step into traffic. When I finally broke the seal, I braced myself for hatred, but the words inside were quiet. She wrote about her husband, about his laugh, about how she had accepted my guilt because it was easier than living with unanswered questions. She wrote that the truth hurt, but that lies had hurt too, in ways she hadn't understood until now. At the end, she wrote something that made me press the paper to my lips and sob. "Thank you for telling the truth before it was too late," she said. "I forgive you." I didn't know then that this forgiveness, this fragile, undeserved gift, would lead me to the most shocking truth of all. One that would change everything I thought I knew about that night, my son, and the lie that had defined my life. That revelation came quietly, and it came too late to take anything back. The revelation didn't arrive with drama or raised voices. It came the way real truths often do, softly, almost politely, slipping into my life when I was too tired to fight it. A week after the article ran, I received a call from a man who introduced himself as retired now, his voice roughened by age and cigarettes. He said he had been one of the first officers on the scene that night. "I wasn't sure whether to reach out," he told me, "but after what you shared, I couldn't stay quiet anymore." I sat down before he could continue. My knees had gone weak, as if my body already knew what my mind hadn't caught up to yet. He told me there had been something unusual about the scene. Another vehicle reported nearby, a shadow that moved away before anyone thought to stop it. He said at the time it was dismissed, too chaotic, too late, too convenient to chase. Once I confessed, the case closed itself neatly. Everyone exhaled and moved on. There was pressure, he admitted, not from above, from time, from grief, from the need for an answer. "Are you saying," I asked slowly, "that my son might not have been the only one involved?" There was a pause, heavy, measured. "I'm saying," he replied, "that there may have been another car, and that the impact might not have been as straightforward as we thought." After we hung up, I sat in silence so deep it felt like being underwater. My ears rang. My chest hurt. For decades, I had carried the certainty of my son's guilt like a sacred burden. It had shaped every decision I made, and now that certainty cracked. If there was another car, if the man had already been hit, already falling, already doomed, then what exactly had my son done? I called him. It rang and rang. No answer. I tried again the next day, and the next. Nothing. My health began to fail more quickly then. Maybe my body sensed that the weight it had been carrying was shifting, rearranging itself in dangerous ways. I grew dizzy easily. Food tasted like nothing. My hands shook even when I rested them in my lap. I asked the journalist to look deeper. She did. Records, witnesses, old dispatch logs, things buried because no one wanted to dig. She came to see me in person when she found something. Her face was pale when she sat across from me, fingers wrapped tightly around her notebook. "There's evidence," she said, "that another driver may have clipped the man first, a hit and run. Your son's car may have struck him after he was already in the road." The room tilted. I gripped the arms of my chair. "Does that mean—" I whispered. "It means," she said carefully, "that responsibility may not have been as clear-cut as everyone believed, including you." I laughed then. A broken sound. All those years, I said, all that time, and the truth was still incomplete. Incomplete truth is its own kind of lie. I thought of my son again, of his fear, of his silence. Had he known, or had he believed, like me, that he was fully to blame? Had he lived with that guilt, buried under the life he built, while I rotted in a cell believing I was saving him? Or worse, had he suspected the truth and let me suffer anyway? That question haunted me. I wrote him one last letter. My handwriting was barely legible by then. I don't know how much of the blame was ever yours, I wrote, but I know this. I chose my silence. You chose yours. We both paid different prices. I never received a reply. Instead, months later, I received news through the journalist. My son had separated from his wife. Stress, she said. Public scrutiny. Guilt resurfacing in ways he could no longer outrun. He had started therapy. He had admitted to someone that he had never been entirely sure what happened that night. That knowledge should have comforted me. It didn't. Because certainty, even painful certainty, is easier to live with than doubt. As my body weakened, my mind wandered more freely. I thought about motherhood, not as a virtue, but as a force. How it can uplift or destroy. How love, when tangled with fear, becomes something dangerous. I had believed sacrifice was the highest form of love. But I was beginning to understand that truth, even when brutal, might be the only thing that truly protects. On my last good day, I asked the journalist to read me parts of the follow-up piece. It was careful, balanced, honest. It didn't absolve me. It didn't condemn my son. It simply told the story as fully as it could be told after so much time had stolen its edges. When she finished, I closed my eyes. I don't regret loving him, I said. But I regret teaching him that love means hiding. She reached for my hand. I was surprised by how warm hers felt. That night, alone in my bed, I spoke aloud to the dark. To the man who died. To the woman who forgave me. To the son who could no longer hear me. I did what I thought was right, I whispered. I know now that right and easy are rarely the same. Sleep took me gently. And in that quiet, I finally understood the most painful truth of all. I hadn't grown old with the lie because my son let me. I grew old with it because I chose it. The final reckoning, what that choice truly meant, was waiting just ahead. When I woke the next morning, it felt like I had crossed some invisible border. My body was still there, frail, aching, slow. But my fear was quieter. Not gone, just tired. As if it had finally spent itself after all those years of guarding a secret that no longer needed protection. They told me later that this happens sometimes. When the end draws closer, the mind loosens its grip. You stop clutching at explanations. You stop rehearsing defenses. You start seeing things as they are, not as you needed them to be in order to survive. I thought about my youth then, about the woman I had been before motherhood wrapped itself around my spine. I had been stubborn once, opinionated, the kind of woman who corrected clerks and spoke up in meetings. Somewhere along the way, loving my son had slowly replaced loving myself. I didn't notice when it happened. These things creep. They never announce themselves. I remembered the first time I took blame for him. He was 12. A broken neighbor's window. He swore it wasn't him. Eyes wide, voice shaking. I paid for the damage, apologized, told myself it was easier than confrontation. Later, I found the baseball hidden under his bed. I never mentioned it. That was the moment, I think. The first rehearsal. The lie that taught him the world could be softened if someone else absorbed the impact. By afternoon, my breathing was shallow. Each inhale felt borrowed. The nurse adjusted my pillows and asked if I wanted to call anyone. Family, she said gently. I shook my head. What I wanted was time, but time, I was finally learning, doesn't answer to want. Instead, I asked for my notebooks. I read them slowly, as if they belonged to someone else, a stranger who had lived a life of quiet endurance, page after page of sacrifice disguised as virtue, fear disguised as devotion. I didn't judge her anymore. I understood her. Survival makes philosophers of us all. As evening crept in, memories came uninvited. The prison yard under a white sky, the sound of gates closing, the way women cried at night for children who wouldn't come. I remembered holding another inmate as she sobbed about missing her son's graduation. I remembered thinking, at least mine is free. Freedom, it turns out, is a complicated word. I thought of my son's children, my grandchildren, though I barely knew them. I wondered what stories he told them about me. Brave grandmother, tragic grandmother, criminal grandmother redeemed by time. I wondered if he ever told them the full truth. Maybe he would one day. Maybe he already had. Truth has a way of surfacing when lies grow too heavy to carry alone. Late that night, I dreamed. Not of the accident, but of a road stretching endlessly forward, empty and quiet. I was standing at the side, watching cars pass. One slowed, stopped. A man stepped out and looked at me, not angry, not accusing, just tired. He nodded once. When I woke, my pillow was damp with tears. The doctor came early the next morning. He spoke kindly, honestly. I appreciated that. I had lived long enough without honesty. I asked him one question. Do you think people are defined by their worst decision? He considered this. I think, he said, people are defined by the truths they finally accept. That stayed with me. As the hours passed, visitors came and went. The journalist sat with me again. She told me my story had sparked conversations everywhere, about justice, about parental sacrifice, about the quiet ways women erase themselves. She said some called me a hero, others called me a cautionary tale. Which one am I? I asked. She smiled sadly. You're human. Near sunset, my son finally came. I hadn't known if he would. When I saw him standing in the doorway, older than ever, something in me loosened. Not forgiveness, not anger, just recognition. He sat beside me, hands clasped tightly, eyes red. For the first time in years, he looked like that frightened boy again. I didn't know how to fix it, he said quietly. I know, I replied. I thought if I kept going, kept building, I could outrun it. You can't outrun the truth, I said. You can only decide when to stop running. He nodded, tears spilling freely now. I'm sorry, he whispered. I should have spoken up, even if I wasn't fully to blame. I should have spoken. Yes, I said. You should have. There was no anger in my voice. Just fact. Just peace. He took my hand. His grip was firm, desperate. What do you want me to do now? I looked at him, really looked at him, and understood something with startling clarity. I want you to tell the truth, I said. Not to punish yourself, not to save your image, but so you don't teach your children the same lesson I taught you, that love means silence. He nodded again. This time it felt real. When he left, I felt no emptiness, only completion. As night settled in, I closed my eyes and listened to my own breathing. Each breath felt like a sentence nearing its final word. I thought of the title my life might carry, if lives had titles. Not martyr, not victim, just this. A woman who learned too late that lies age you faster than time, and that truth, even whispered at the end, still matters. The final part of my story waited just beyond sleep. The last night was quiet, in a way I had never known before. Not the heavy quiet of secrets pressing against your ribs, not the tense quiet of waiting for consequences, but a soft, settling silence, like dust finally coming to rest after years of being stirred. I was not afraid. That surprised me most of all. Fear had been my companion for so long that I assumed it would be there at the end, clinging to me like a second skin. But it wasn't. What I felt instead was clarity. Not happiness. Not relief exactly. Just a clean, open knowing. I understood my life then, not as a series of mistakes, but as a series of choices made with the tools I had at the time: love, fear, silence, survival. I had used what I had, even when it cut me in the process. The nurse checked on me once more, her steps gentle, respectful. She thought I was sleeping. I let her think that. Some moments are meant to be private. I thought again of the man on the road. Not the accident, just him. The sound of his shoes on pavement, the weight of his day, the life that ended too early. I hoped, wherever he was, that the truth had reached him in some form, that he knew he hadn't been forgotten, that his death had finally been seen clearly. I thought of his wife, brave in her forgiveness, stronger than I had ever been. I thought of my son, not as the man who let me take the blame, but as the boy he once was. The boy I loved so fiercely that I forgot love must include truth to survive. I no longer needed him to absolve me. I no longer needed an apology to justify my years. I had already made peace with the hardest truth of all: that love does not excuse the harm it causes when it hides behind fear. If he told the truth after I was gone, that would be his choice, his reckoning, his growth. My story no longer needed to carry his. I had carried enough. As dawn crept in through the thin hospital curtains, the light pale and hesitant, I felt my body loosening its grip. Pain drifted away, replaced by a strange warmth. My breathing slowed, each breath softer than the last. And in that gentle unraveling, I realized something extraordinary. The lie that had aged me, the lie I believed had stolen my life, no longer had power over me. It hadn't followed me here. The truth had, not the legal truth, not the version debated in articles or whispered in courtrooms, but the deeper truth, the one that finally allowed me to see myself without flinching. I had not been weak, I had been afraid, and I had learned. I understood now that taking blame is not the same as taking responsibility. That sacrifice without honesty is not noble, it is corrosive. That silence does not protect love, it slowly strangles it. If someone is listening to my story now, if these words reach another mother standing at the edge of a terrible choice, this is what I want her to know. Love your children fiercely, but do not disappear for them. Do not teach them that your pain is cheaper than their truth. Do not trade your voice for their comfort and call it devotion. Truth is not cruel, it is clean. The lie let me grow old, yes, but it did not get to define how I ended. I ended awake. I ended honest. I ended free. And as the light filled the room, soft and forgiving, I let go. Not of my love, not of my memories, but of the burden I had carried for a lifetime. At last, I rested in the only thing that never aged me at all: the truth. I thought that would be the end. That moment, quiet, honest, final, felt complete enough to close any story. And yet life, even at its very edge, still had one more turn waiting for me. Not loud, not dramatic, just precise, almost surgical. They say hearing is the last sense to go. I don't know if that's true, but I know this: I was still aware when the room changed, when footsteps that didn't belong to the nurses paused near my bed, when a chair moved softly, when paper rustled. I didn't open my eyes. I didn't need to. The journalist was there again. She had been given permission, she said later, because I had asked for her name to be written in my file weeks before. If there's time, I had told the nurse then, let her come. She thought I was unconscious. She spoke quietly, respectfully, as if I were already gone. I wanted you to know, she said, voice low, steady, that something else came out last night. Her words drifted through me like a tide. They found the other driver. That sentence landed deeper than anything I had heard in years. She explained, slowly, carefully, that after the second article, someone had come forward. An old man now, dying too. He had carried his own secret for decades, convinced the case was closed, that no one wanted to hear it anymore. He had clipped the man first, panicked, driven away. When the news resurfaced, when my confession reopened the wound, guilt finally outweighed fear. He confessed, fully. There it was. The truth that had waited until there was nothing left for it to destroy. My son had not caused the first impact. He had struck the man afterward, but not with the force everyone believed, not with the intention everyone assumed, not as the singular villain my silence had built him into. The journalist continued, unaware that tears slid quietly from the corners of my closed eyes. The investigators say, she went on, that if this had been known then, the outcome would have been very different. For you, for him. Different. That word echoed. All those years, all that aging, all that sacrifice, and yet, I felt no anger rise, not even regret, because something else arrived in its place, relief. Not the sharp, explosive kind, but a deep, settling relief, the kind that sinks into your bones and stays there. My son had not been as guilty as I believed, and still, I would have made the same choice. That realization surprised me more than anything, because now, stripped of guilt and punishment and imagined martyrdom, the truth stood clean and bare. I hadn't lied because he was guilty. I had lied because I was afraid of losing him. And that fear had been real, human, understandable, but it no longer owned me. The journalist's voice softened. Your story helped bring this out, she said. Without you telling the truth, this wouldn't have surfaced. You didn't just confess, you completed the story. Completed. That was the word. When she left, the room grew quiet again. But it was a different quiet now. Not final, not heavy, just resolved. Later, hours or minutes, time had blurred. The nurse leaned close and spoke gently, thinking I was drifting. Your son called, she said. He knows. I felt it then, a faint pressure in my chest. Not pain, emotion, something loosening for the very last time. I imagined him hearing the news, the weight lifting from places he hadn't known were crushed. I imagined him realizing that even if the law could no longer rewrite the past, the truth already had. I hoped, quietly without demand, that he would forgive himself, because I already had. If he ever wondered whether my life had been wasted, the answer was no. I lived, I loved, I learned. I paid for my choices, not because I was wrong to love, but because love without truth demands a terrible interest rate. And still, I do not regret loving him. I regret only this, that I didn't teach him sooner that love survives honesty better than it survives silence. As my breathing slowed again, as the edges of the room softened into light and shadow, I understood the final twist of my life. I did not grow old because of the lie. I grew old because time does that to all of us. The lie only taught me what age eventually teaches everyone, that the truth, no matter how late it arrives, always arrives complete. And when it doesn't come to punish. It comes to set things down, gently, at last. And with that understanding warming me from the inside out, I let go. Not with fear, not with regret, but with a calm I had earned the hardest way possible. My story didn't end in prison. It didn't end in betrayal. It didn't even end in confession. It ended in clarity. And that was enough. There was one last thing I didn't know until afterward, something I couldn't have known while I was still breathing, still thinking, still holding on to the shape of myself. My son came back. Not to the hospital room, not in time for words or apologies or explanations. He came back after the machines were quiet, after the sheets were straightened, after my body had become something people spoke about in the past tense. He came back to the house. I know this because the journalist told me later, told my story later, told it the way endings are told when the person who lived them is no longer there to interrupt. She said he stood in the doorway for a long time, just looking, as if he expected me to scold him for not taking his shoes off, as if I might still be there bent over the table, writing slowly, stubbornly, refusing to rest. He walked through each room like a guest in a museum, touching nothing at first, then everything. He opened drawers, found the notebooks, all of them. He sat at the kitchen table and read until his shoulders folded in on themselves, page after page of a life he had never truly seen, not the version he needed, the version that existed. He cried then, not the quiet, restrained tears he had learned as a man, but the messy, childlike kind. The kind that shakes your ribs. The kind that leaves you emptied out. He told the journalist later that this was the moment he understood something he had spent his entire life misunderstanding, that my silence had never been strength, and that his survival had come at a cost he was finally willing to name. He turned himself in, not to be punished, not to be tried, not because the law demanded it, but because truth demanded witnesses. He gave a full statement, not just about the accident, but about the years after, about what it feels like to let someone else carry your weight, about how that weight grows heavier, not lighter, over time. The law listened. The law nodded. The law closed its books again. But something else opened. He spoke publicly, not as a victim, not as a redeemed man, but as a son who had learned too late that love is not proven by how much pain someone will take for you, but by how much truth you are willing to carry yourself. He told people about me, not as a saint, not as a cautionary headline, but as a woman, a complicated, fearful, loving woman who made a choice, and then spent a lifetime learning what that choice really meant. The man who confessed to the hit and run died shortly after. His family and the other family, both of them, met quietly, away from cameras, away from noise. Grief does not need an audience. It only needs honesty. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the story stopped being about blame. It became about responsibility. Years passed. My son grew older too. Softer in some ways, stronger in others. He raised his children differently. When they broke something, he didn't rush to shield them. He taught them how to stand still and tell the truth, even when their voices shook. He kept my notebooks. Sometimes he reread them, sometimes he couldn't. And sometimes, this is what moved me the most, when I heard it, he spoke to me out loud when the house was empty. Not to ask forgiveness, but to thank me for finally teaching him the lesson I never meant to teach through silence. As for me, if there is anything after, if there is awareness beyond the last breath, then I exist there not as a woman defined by a lie, but as a woman who outgrew it. I am not frozen at my worst decision. I am not trapped in that courtroom, that cell, that night with flashing lights and a single word that changed everything. I am the sum of all my moments, including the ones where I learned, painfully, belatedly, how to choose better. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: love does not require your erasure. Sacrifice does not require your silence. And motherhood, true motherhood, does not mean standing between your child and the truth. It means teaching them how to face it. I took the blame for a crime my son committed, or thought he committed, and I grew old with the lie. But I did not die with it. I died knowing that the truth, even delayed, even incomplete, still has the power to heal in ways punishment never can. That is my ending. Not perfect, not clean, but honest. And finally, after a lifetime of carrying what wasn't mine alone, free. If stories truly end where the breath stops, then mine would have been finished already. But some stories don't end when the heart does. They end when the truth finally settles into the lives it was meant to reach. After I was gone, my name kept traveling. Not loudly, not sensationally. It moved the way real stories do, passed hand to hand, voice to voice, late at night when people are honest with themselves. Mothers read it and went quiet. Fathers reread certain lines twice. Sons closed their eyes. Daughters held their phones a little tighter. People argued about me. They always will. Some said I was wrong no matter my reasons. Some said they would have done the same. Most admitted in whispers that they had already done smaller versions of it, taken blame, swallowed truth, stayed silent to keep love intact. That is how I know my life mattered. Not because I was perfect, but because I was recognizable. My son carried that recognition like a second spine. It straightened him in ways therapy alone never could. He stopped avoiding mirrors, stopped rushing through conversations, stopped pretending that silence was peace. He visited the man's grave, the one whose life ended that night. He brought no flowers, just himself. He stood there for a long time, hands in his pockets, head bowed, and spoke words no court had ever required of him. "I'm sorry," he said. Not because the law demanded it, but because truth finally did. When he left, he didn't feel absolved, but he felt aligned. And alignment, he would later say, is what guilt had robbed him of all those years. He told his children my story when they were old enough to understand it, not softened, not dramatized, just honest. They asked hard questions. He answered them. Sometimes his voice shook. He didn't hide that either. That was how the cycle ended, not with punishment, but with courage. As for the world, it moved on, as the world always does. New stories replaced mine, new scandals, new confessions, new arguments about right and wrong. But mine remained, archived in quiet places, resurfacing when someone searched for answers they couldn't find anywhere else. And if there is a place where consciousness lingers, if I exist now as something more than memory, then I exist without the weight I once carried. I am not bent anymore. I am not tired. I am not rehearsing excuses in the dark. I see my life clearly now, without the distortion of fear. I see where I failed, yes, but I also see where I tried, where I loved, where I learned too late, but learned nonetheless. And I forgive myself. That may be the most shocking twist of all. Not that the truth came out. Not that another driver confessed. Not that my son changed. But that I, who spent a lifetime believing my worth was measured by what I could endure, finally understood this. I was never meant to be a shield. I was meant to be a guide. I thought protecting my child meant standing in front of consequences. Now I know it meant standing beside the truth. If you are listening to this story with a secret of your own, with a lie you've been carrying so long it feels like part of your bones, hear me now, clearly, finally without fear. It is not too late, not to speak, not to stop sacrificing yourself, not to teach a better lesson than the one silence teaches. The truth may not undo the past, but it can still change the future. It changed mine, even at the very end. I took the blame for a crime my son committed. I grew old with the lie. But I left this world lighter than I entered it, because I did not take the lie with me. And that is how my story truly ends. Time doesn't move the same way once a story like mine leaves the body it lived in. It stretches, it echoes, it returns in unexpected places. Years after my death, long after the house was sold, the notebooks archived, my name reduced to a line in search results, someone else began telling my story in a voice not unlike my own. An elderly woman on a small channel, her hands folded in her lap, eyes clouded with age but sharp with memory. She spoke slowly, carefully, as if each word had weight. She never met me, but she knew me. That's the strange thing about truth. Once it's spoken honestly, it stops belonging to just one life. She told her listeners about a mother who believed love meant absorbing pain. about a son who mistook silence for protection, about how easy it is to confuse sacrifice with virtue when the world praises quiet endurance, especially in women. And each time she paused, you could hear people breathing on the other side of the screen, recognizing themselves. A woman in the comments wrote that she had just told her grown daughter the truth about a lie she'd carried for 20 years. A man admitted he had let his mother apologize for something he did as a teenager and had never corrected it. Another said he was calling his father after the video ended. This is how endings ripple, not cleanly, not neatly, but meaningfully. My son watched one of those videos late one night. He didn't know it was about me at first. He only realized halfway through when a line sounded too familiar, too close to something I had once said. He didn't finish the video. He sat in the dark for a long time afterward, thinking, not about guilt, not about blame, but about inheritance. Not money or houses or keepsakes, but lessons. What we pass down without realizing it, what we normalize, what we teach by example instead of intention. The next morning, he apologized to his daughter for something small, something that didn't require it. He did it anyway. He told her that adults get things wrong too, that telling the truth matters more than looking good. She hugged him, confused but smiling. That was the real legacy, not the articles, not the debates, not even the confession, but the interruption of a pattern. I used to believe that my life's meaning was tied to how much pain I could absorb without breaking. That was the world I grew up in. Women endured, mothers absorbed. Silence was called strength. But strength, I learned too late and just in time, is not about how much you can carry. It's about knowing when to put something down. If I could speak one last time, not from memory, not through pages or voices, but directly, plainly, this is what I would say. You are not required to suffer to prove you love someone. You are not required to lie to keep peace. You are not required to disappear so others can remain comfortable. Truth is not a weapon, it is a boundary. And boundaries are how love survives without turning toxic. I did not live perfectly. I did not choose well at every turn. But I did choose honesty before the end. And that choice reached further than all my years of silence combined. Some lives burn bright and brief, some flicker quietly and last a long time. Mine was the second kind, and even a quiet light, when finally uncovered, can help others find their way. That is the final part of my story. Not the lie, not the blame, not even the truth itself. But what the truth made possible after I was gone. And that is enough.